Chair of the Policy Insights Forum and the President and CEO of Samuel Associates, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Policy Insights Forum for our Strategic Perspective series. Bonjour. Au nom de Goran Samuel Pesek, président du Policy Insights Forum et président directeur général de Samuel Associates, j'ai le plaisir de vous accueillir au Policy Insights Forum pour notre série de perspectives stratégiques. L'événement d'aujourd'hui s'intitule « Une stratégie de sécurité nationale pour l'Arctique, une perspective américano-canadienne ». Nos invités spéciaux sont Madame Marisol Maddox, le colonel retraité Pierre Leblanc et le major général retraité des forces aériennes Charles Sullivan. Le modérateur de notre événement d'aujourd'hui est le Dr Paul Taillon, vice-président du Policy Insights Forum et Senior Academic Advisor de Samuel Associates. Today's event is entitled A National Security Strategy for the Arctic, a U.S.-Canadian View. Our special guests today are Ms. Marisol Maddox, Colonel retired Pierre Leblanc, and Air Force Major General retired Charles Sullivan. Our event moderator today is Dr. Paul Taillon, Vice Chair of the Policy Insights Forum and Senior Academic Advisor to Samuel Associates. I am Aliénor Peyrefitte, Policy Research Intern for the Policy Insights Forum. I am currently completing my master's degree in international relations at Laval University in Quebec City. The Policy Insights Forum, or the PIF, is a nonpartisan research division of Samuel Associates. The forum helps improve policy and decision-making through independent research, analysis, and engagement. Je suis Aliénor Peyrefitte, stagiaire en recherche politique pour le Policy Insights Forum. Je termine actuellement ma maîtrise en relations internationales à l'Université Laval à Québec. Le Policy Insights Forum, ou le PIF, est une division de recherche non partisane de Samuel Associates. Le forum contribue à améliorer l'élaboration de politiques et la prise de décision par le biais de la recherche, d'analyse et d'engagement indépendant. Samuel Associates est un conseiller de confiance pour de nombreuses entreprises et dirigeants influents. Nous travaillons avec des clients dans le secteur de l'aérospatial, de la défense, de la sécurité nationale et du cyberespace en leur fournissant des services de conseil sur le marché et des relations avec le gouvernement. Samuel Associates is a trusted advisor to many influential businesses and leaders. We work with clients in the aerospace, defense, national security, and cyberspace industries, providing market advisory services and government relations. Today's event is brought to you by Samuel Associates. We hope you enjoy the session and encourage you to participate. This morning's event will explore the following key topics concerning national security strategy for the Arctic from an American-Canadian view. Our speakers will attempt to address some challenging subjects, including bolstering Canada's Arctic presence through a whole-of-government approach, the importance of Canada's alliances with the United States within NORAD, NATO, and with other Arctic partners, addressing the Northwest Passage question, implications for strategic engagement, investment, and connectivity in Canada's North and Arctic regions, public diplomacy strategy, what are Canada and the United States doing to engage our respective citizens, business leaders, and elected officials on this strategic issue? Lastly, U.S. perspectives on the Canadian position. L'événement de ce matin explorera des sujets majeurs en ce qui concerne une stratégie de sécurité nationale pour l'Arctique d'un point de vue américano-canadien. Nos intervenants tenteront d'apporter des éléments de réponse aux sujets épineux suivants, incluant le renforcement de la présence du Canada dans l'Arctique par une approche du gouvernement dans son ensemble, l'importance des alliances du Canada avec les États-Unis au sein de NORAD, de l'OTAN et avec d'autres partenaires de l'Arctique, la réponse à la question du passage du Nord-Ouest, les implications pour l'engagement stratégique, l'investissement et la connectivité dans les régions du Nord et de l'Arctique du Canada, la stratégie de diplomatie publique, Que font le Canada et les États-Unis pour mobiliser leurs citoyens, chefs d'entreprise et élus respectifs sur cette question stratégique? Enfin, les perspectives américaines sur la position canadienne. L'événement d'aujourd'hui vous est offert par Samuel Associates. Nous espérons que vous apprécierez la session et nous vous encourageons à participer. Before we begin, I would like to thank industry and association executives, government officials from Canada and the United States, NATO members in Europe, and foreign government representatives participating in today's event. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais remercier les dirigeants de l'industrie et des associations, les représentants des gouvernements du Canada et des États-Unis, des membres de l'OTAN en Europe et les représentants des gouvernements étrangers qui participent à l'événement aujourd'hui. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the forum. Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue au forum. J'invite maintenant le Dr Paul Taillon à prendre la parole en tant que modérateur de cet événement. I now invite Dr. Paul Taillon to take the floor as a moderator of this event. Dr. Taillon?
Thank you, Aliénor. Good morning. My name is Paul Taillon, and I'm the academic advisor to Samuel Associates and the host of Policy Insights Forum. The topic for today is a national security strategy for the Arctic, a US-Canadian view. To discuss this important topic, we are fortunate to have today Marisol Maddox, Colonel Pierre Leblanc, and Major General Charles Sullivan, retired. I would like to start off by introducing each of these speakers. Marisol Maddox is the Arctic Analyst at the Polar Institute of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. She is also a non-resident research fellow at the Center for Climate and Security, a member of the 2021 cohort of the Newport Arctic Scholars Initiative of the U.S. Naval War College, and a member of the Next Gen Foreign Policy Initiative of Foreign Policy for America. Ms. Maddox's research considers the security implications of emerging actorless threats such as climate change and biodiversity loss, and the ways they influence security strategy and geopolitical dynamics, as well as a broader threat to environment. She spent over a decade studying ecology, organic regenerative agriculture, and resilient systems, and now combines that background with the security field to foster policies that focus on long-term stability. She is particularly interested in opportunities for enhanced international collaboration on shared security concerns. Ms. Maddox holds an MA in International Security with a concentration in transnational threats from George Mason University. She also holds a BA in Environmental Studies with a concentration in ecosystems from Binghamton University. Colonel Pierre Leblanc was born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. At 17, he joined the Canadian Forces and attended the Collège Militaire Royal de Saint-Jean in 1967. After graduating, he joined the Royal 22nd Regiment, a famed Canadian infantry regiment, and saw service in a number of countries, including England, Germany, Cyprus, India, and Nepal. He commanded the Premier Commando and the Infantry School and held senior staff appointments in National Defense Headquarters. In 1995, he took command of the Canadian Forces Northern Area, which he served until his retirement in 2000. Colonel Leblanc has extensive experience in the Arctic, where he first traveled on a sovereignty patrol in 1972. He has also repeatedly traveled in and out of the Arctic. His command appointment as commander of Canadian Forces Northern Area allowed him to travel extensively, including Alaska and at Greenland. He lived more than 9 years in the Arctic and has been an advocate for improved security in the Arctic since 1998. He was instrumental in the revived Canadian government's focus on Arctic security. He has been published and repeatedly quoted in the media. He has appeared on as subject matter expert on Arctic security and sovereignty on several national television channels. He has made presentations in a number of Canadian universities and has consulted on Arctic matters with a number of federal departments, the Canadian Forces, the Canadian Senate. He has also provided advice to several defense-related companies. Colonel Leblanc served with Raytheon Canada Limited as the program manager of the North Warning System from April 2014 to 2016. The North Warning System consists of 47 air defense radar stations stretching in the Arctic from the Alaska-Yukon border to Labrador, 5 logistics support sites in the Arctic, a second line support center, and a control center located in North Bay, Ontario, as well as a contract management office in Ottawa, Ontario. During that period, he traveled the Arctic widely to nurture his Arctic network of business, government, and Inuit leadership contacts. He continues to provide independent advice on the Canadian Arctic and works with a number of associates who bring expertise in a number of fields. He's a council member with the Gerson Lehrman Group of New York, the Coleman Research Group, and the Guide Point Group Advisors, also of New York, with offices around the world. Colonel Leblanc has a bachelor's degree in sciences, holds a Royal Military College of Science from England diploma in project management, and has a master's degree in business administration from Queen's University. He is also a certified diamond grader from the Gemological Institute of America. I would also like to introduce General Charles Duff Sullivan, Boeing International Team, joined Boeing International Team in August 2020 as Managing Director. Based in Ottawa, Ontario, he's responsible for lead company strategy, developing business and industrial partnerships, expanding stakeholder relationships, and leading Boeing's productivity and enterprise functions in Canada. General Sullivan has more than 10 years of consulting experience related to defense, security, aviation, and aerospace, as well as ethics and leadership. Prior to entering the private sector, he has had a 31-year career in the Royal Canadian Air Force. In 2014, General Sullivan received a Governor and Council appointment to serve as a presiding member of the Transportation Appeal Tribunal of Canada, and was later appointed chairperson and chief executive officer of that tribunal. General Sullivan has also served in several senior executive and high-profile leadership positions throughout his military career, most notably as Director General of Capability Development at National Defence Headquarters in Ottawa, Director of International Security and Senior Defence Advisor in the Prime Minister's Office, the Privy Council, and Director of Operations for the Canadian NORAD region, where he led the transformation of Canada's new Homeland Defence and Continental Security Mission in the wake of 9/11, and the Air Security Mission for the 2002 G8 Summit at Kananaskis, Alberta. Prior to retiring from the Air Force in 2009, he served in the rank of Major General on a 12-month tour in Afghanistan as NATO's Air Component Commander and Deputy Chief of Joint Operations. In the Royal Canadian Air Force, General Sullivan accumulated more than 3,500 hours flying jet aircraft, 1,600 hours of which were flown in the CF-18. He has flown operational missions over Europe, the Middle East, Bosnia, Croatia, Kosovo, and Canada's High Arctic, and the North Atlantic. Sullivan has commanded a tactical air control party, a CF-18 fighter squadron, an Air Force fighter wing, and main operating base, and a NATO forces during the Afghan combat operations. I would now like to ask Ms. Maddox to take the floor to provide her overview. Madam, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul, for inviting me to be here today. And I'm really honored to be on a panel with such esteemed individuals. So the Arctic is truly an endlessly fascinating region and a place where numerous cutting edge dynamics are converging. So to set up my Canadian colleagues for their remarks, I'll provide a brief overview of some of the different dimensions of the conversation about Arctic security, including 2 major points, which are the emerging role of actorless threats, which serve as threat multipliers and challenge conventional ways of thinking about security and defense, and some thoughts on Russia and risk reduction in the Arctic. And then I'll touch briefly on the stabilizing roles of governance and international law, as well as some thoughts on China, a non-Arctic state. In regards to actorless threats, I'm very pleased to note that both the governments of the United States and Canada recognize the threat that climate change poses. However, I do think it's necessary to discuss the paradigm shift associated with this rise in actorless threats. There's an abundance of evidence that non-state-based threats or actorless threats, whether it be a pandemic like COVID-19 or climate change or a dramatic increase in global biodiversity loss, are emerging as significant factors in the global threat environment. The extent of these threats can only be properly appreciated through a systems thinking lens. This is important for identification of problems as well as crafting solutions. So it's important to break out of siloed thinking. As was announced at the Arctic Council Ministerial last week, the Arctic is now warming not 2, but 3 times faster than the global rate of change. Our success or failure to properly plan for the impacts of climate change and to reduce risk will influence other factors such as the strength of democracy and legitimacy of governments. More research and data sharing is needed, and that's an area for increased international cooperation, but enough is known that action on multiple fronts is necessary. The signing last month of the International Cooperative Engagement Program for Polar Research, or ICE-PPR, which the US and Canada, as well as 5 of our other allies are part of, is a step in the right direction for the kind of international cooperation that we need. Years ago, Sherry Goodman coined the phrase threat multiplier to reflect that climate change is a threat not only because of its direct impacts, but more importantly, because of the way it interacts with a host of destabilizing factors to increase fragility. These factors also include the behavior of states, which is why we are seeing a significant emerging dimension of the geopolitics of climate change and the global shift towards decarbonization. We see a country like Russia with newly exposed coastline seeking to simultaneously build up defense of their northern flank, as well as to realize the economic potential of their oil, gas, and mineral assets and their vision of a commercialized northern sea route. Their focus on adaptation instead of a balanced mitigation and adaptation approach increases their long-term risk. Yes, Russia stands to benefit in some ways from climate change, but the risks outweigh those benefits, especially if global emissions reductions are not realized in a timely manner. They face increased threats as it is from wildfires, droughts, sea level rise, coastal and riverine flooding, and permafrost thaw, which harbors viruses and releases radon, mercury, as well as potent greenhouse gases like methane and carbon dioxide. Structural challenges such as entrenched interests and a focus on short-term profits prevent Russia from realizing more effective climate change mitigation policies, which must be accounted for in longer-term thinking by the West, because a destabilized Russia does not necessarily bode well for international security. Russia is also seeking to ramp up shipping faster than they are developing their ability to respond in the event of an incident, such as a search and rescue or a marine environmental response. Hopefully, since they're now chair of the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, they will use that opportunity to increase their response capabilities, as well as interoperability and communication with Arctic partner nations. And since we have a large Canadian audience today, I do want to note that because I had the privilege of being involved in the planning for the virtual Arctic Guardian 21 exercise, I really was blown away by the expertise and professionalism of the Canadian Coast Guard and the emergency management side of Canada's energy regulator. And that kind of cooperation is really encouraging to see happening in real time at the operator level. Arctic maritime activity is an area where it's crucial for there to be maximum cooperation and where there has continued to be success with engaging Russia. The utmost care must be taken across the Arctic as human activity in the marine environment increases because of the critical role that the blue bioeconomy plays in the economies of Arctic states, in subsistence activities and food security, and because marine inhabitants and ecosystems are already facing tremendous upheaval due to changes in temperature, salinity, pH, to name but a few factors. On the military front, Russia has been remilitarizing and modernizing its former Cold War bases and has been testing increasingly sophisticated weapons systems. Parsing offensive from defensive capabilities can be challenging, and following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, their aggressive cyber, electronic warfare, and information operations campaigns against the West, along with their domestic moves towards authoritarianism, do create more concern about advancements in Russian military capability. Just as it's natural for Russia to supplement their homeland security in the wake of climate change exposing its northern flank, it's also natural for their neighbors to be concerned. What we need to be careful of is balancing the development of credible deterrence and operational capability in the Arctic with not triggering security dilemma dynamics any more than they have already been on display. We have seen a significant increase in military activity in the region and more tension around certain maneuvers than is really healthy. There is also legitimate concern that if a conflict were to be sparked elsewhere, that it may end up in the Arctic due to the presence of high value assets. At this point, we are seeing the urgency growing for reestablishment of dialogue mechanisms to reduce risk of unintended escalation, to communicate red lines and ensure appropriate signaling, and to work towards greater transparency. The goal of the initial round of sanctions in March 2014, including the ban on military to military cooperation, was to influence Russian behavior and decrease risk of further conflict, in this case, specifically to deter further aggressive actions against Ukraine. The point to remember here is ultimately the goal is to increase security and stability and to decrease risk of conflict. A lot has happened in the 7 years since Crimea's annexation, such that now, if we're still working towards the objective of decreasing risk, then we really need to resume some type of military to military dialogue and cooperation on Arctic security matters. This is important for mitigating risk of tensions from outside the Arctic, potentially compromising the good work that's done in the Arctic. Russia has suggested restarting the Arctic Chiefs of Defense, but it may be more palatable to start somewhere else with dialogue and confidence building measures. There are a couple of notable efforts in the works I'd like to point out. Number one, at Munich Security Conference, Polar Institute has worked with NUPI to develop Arctic security roundtable discussions, since this is a venue that already attracts high-level representation from relevant governments. Second, the current cohort of the Newport Arctic Scholars Initiative at the US Naval War College is developing the concept of an Arctic Ocean Naval Symposium, which ultimately seeks to bring together chiefs of navies to discuss, coordinate, and cooperate on naval security and defense issues in the Arctic. A quick note on governance. The Arctic Council is the region's most important intergovernmental forum for cooperative efforts on topics of shared interests, such as sustainable development and scientific research. The consensus on recognition of UNCLOS as customary international law, plus the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement and the IMO's Polar Code, show there's no legal vacuum in the Arctic, and this has a significantly stabilizing force for the region. Cooperation should continue through the Arctic Council. However, Arctic Ocean governance will need to be strengthened to account for changes coming down the pike related to the mandate of the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement to create a management body for the Arctic Ocean, as well as for eventual implementation of BB&J agreement. The release of the Arctic Council's first ever strategic plan last week was an encouraging sign of the political will to strengthen the Arctic Council. And a brief note on China, and we can talk about it more in the discussion. Notice I'm talking about China separately from Russia on purpose, because Russia is a legitimate and major Arctic actor, and China is not. They're not an Arctic state. They do seek access, presence, and influence in the Arctic, but I think that I'm very weary of putting them together when we talk about Russia and China, like they need to be treated separately. For the reasons I explained. Under Xi Jinping, there have been advancements in civil-military fusion, which blurs the line between civilian and military interests and involvement. Similarly, as China advances militarily, we know they are interested in securing a sea-based nuclear deterrent for the third leg of their triad, and that the Arctic is one potential place for that to occur. It is in their interest and the interest of every other country in the world for there to be cooperative efforts on climate research and in reducing global emissions, but they make that cooperation harder when they so obviously have ulterior motives and actively seek to undermine the West. The Chinese government has demonstrated their willingness and even a strategy to leverage economic investments for political purposes, which is a concern when it comes to states with smaller economies. Over the last couple of years in particular, however, Arctic states have become more wise to some of the strings attached and the dual use potential of prospective investments and research. Notably, the Finnish Arctic Connect project to install a subsea fiber optic cable connecting Asia to the Nordic countries dropped Huawei as a partner. And then, of course, recently in Canada, the purchase of a gold mine by a Chinese state-owned company was denied on the grounds of national security. So in conclusion, the scope of the threats that climate change poses and the way that it influences the threat environment is truly unprecedented. But this also does create a remarkable opportunity for unprecedented international and multidisciplinary cooperation. It also advances very compelling arguments for strengthening and revaluing of Indigenous populations, since ultimately they are the ones we need to learn from, because they understand how to live in one place without over consuming, which I think is one of the issues at the heart of why we are facing these climate change issues. And Canada has been a leader in that, especially in the development of their Arctic strategy, which was a highly inclusive process with Canada's Indigenous populations. And with that, I will hand the floor back over to you, Paul. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Marisol. I'd like to turn to Pierre Leblanc for his expose.
Thank you very much. If I could have the first slide, please. So thank you for the kind introduction and the invitation to participate in this important discussion. Canada faces one immediate threat and one longer range threat. The threat from global warming is present, damaging, and growing. The longer range threat is that posed by the traditional state-to-state threat. Next slide, please. The major impact of global warming is the melting of the sea ice in the Arctic. Prior to the loss of sea ice due to global warming, the Canadian Arctic was basically an inaccessible no man's land between the Soviet Union and then Russia. China was not even on the radar screen in those days. The fast disappearing ice is now increasing maritime access to the Arctic, and this is invariably leading to increased human activity and increasing risk of maritime accident and pollution. A crude oil or heavy fuel oil spill would threaten the food security of Inuit communities and cause lasting damage to a very fragile ecosystem. It could also be argued that more of the airborne persistent pollution that have vaporized in the south will drift to the Arctic, where it will crystallize, settle down, and accumulate. Arctic storms are becoming stronger and will increase the incidence of search and rescue, especially of unprepared adventurers. Those storms are also increasing the loss of shoreline no longer protected by sea ice. Permafrost is melting and releasing more greenhouse gases. It also leads to damaged infrastructure, like the runway at the Inuvik Airport, one of our forward operating location for the CF-18, and will lead to relocation of communities such as Tuktoyaktuk. Next slide, please. To counter this threat, Canada needs to increase research in the Arctic to better understand the changes taking place in order to be able to mitigate their impact. You cannot manage something that you cannot measure. It should share its research, technologies, and best practice with like-minded countries. It also needs to contribute to and encourage the international efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by contributing to the efforts of the Paris Agreement, coordinating targets with the USA that is now taking a leadership role, and it has to actually meet its own targets, something the governing political parties have failed to do to date. Next slide, please. For the purpose of the discussion, I exclude cyber and espionage in the Arctic, even though they permeate the activities of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. I should also mention that I do not perceive a credible threat to the landmass of the Canadian Arctic. Such a scenario would trigger Article 5 of NATO and exact a price that I believe neither Russia or China would be prepared to pay. Especially over the last decade, as has been mentioned, Russia has been rearming. It has significantly expanded its military capabilities in the Arctic, and it is increasingly aggressive in other parts of the world, like its recent deployment of troops near Ukraine. It continues to develop offensive weapons like hypersonic cruise missiles. Although it has cooperated well in the Arctic to date, there is a risk of a spillover from other parts of the world. And although at the last Ministerial Arctic Council meeting, Russia has pledged to continue to cooperate in the Arctic, there has been mixed messages. China, calling itself a near Arctic state, continues to modernize its military capabilities. Its navy is the largest in the world, and it is building aircraft carriers, which are power projection weapons, not defensive systems. It is also becoming more abusive by flexing its economic power and with aggressive behavior in the South China Sea and towards Taiwan. China makes policy statements which are not reflected by its actions, such as in the Spratly Islands, and now it has acted with Hong Kong. It ignores international law when it doesn't serve its national interests. It has been said that China has removed its smiling mask, and I'm very concerned with their long-term plans. Next slide, please. First of all, Canada needs to continue to increase its domain awareness in the Arctic. It does so in part by using the RadarSat constellation, but needs to add over-the-horizon radar, high-frequency surface wave radar to monitor the entry points in the Arctic archipelago and its exclusive economic zone, and increase its subsurface surveillance. It also has to increase its presence in the Arctic through the deployment of the Arctic offshore patrol ships coming into service, the annual deployment of the Canadian Coast Guard icebreakers, by maintaining the presence of the Canadian Rangers, and by using Aurora long-range maritime patrol aircraft and long-range drones. It should continue its series of annual combined Arctic exercises to which many of our allies have participated. Canada needs to invest in its Arctic infrastructure to support security operations, search and rescue, and environmental responses. At the moment, there are no ports in the Canadian Arctic other than a small dock in Iqaluit. Resolute Bay, which sits in the middle of the Arctic Northwest Passage and is central to the Arctic archipelago, would be an excellent choice for the next investment. Resolute Bay would also benefit from a paved runway capable of supporting fighter operations. Canada also needs to invest in better communications north of 60 to support domain awareness and operations. OneWeb has recently announced that it will provide services to the Canadian forces in the Arctic. Telesat's low Earth orbit constellation is also a good candidate to provide those communications. The number of satellites of these systems will also provide some redundancy. Next slide, please. Canada's security is best achieved through alliances such as NORAD and NATO. NORAD already has an Arctic maritime warning function. The modernization of NORAD should consider the inclusion of joint maritime defense, similar to the defense of airborne threats, where US and Canadian fighter aircraft can be deployed in either airspace. Better still, the USA could recognize the internal waters of Canada and deny Russia and China a strategic waterway. The modernization of NORAD, including that of the North Warning System, is timely, with the USA now more concerned with its Arctic presence at a time when Russia and China are increasing theirs. All their services have recently published Arctic strategies. For its part, Canada needs to finance its contribution to the North Warning System and join the Global Missile Defense Coalition efforts. In time, it would be useful to restart the annual meeting of Arctic Chief of Defense Staff to reduce the possibility of miscalculation. Next slide, please. The challenge is at the size of Canada, especially when you include its economic, exclusive economic zone, that pink area on the left picture, and its extended continental shelves. To put things into perspective, the right-hand side image is that of continental Europe, over the Canadian Arctic with room to spare. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions in either French or English. Paul, the floor is back to you.
Thank you, Pierre. I'd like to now turn to General Charles and see what he has to say from the Boeing point of view. Sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Talion, and it's great to see everybody on this call today. And I'm honored to be in the presence of Marisol and Colonel Leblanc and Aliénor. And I have to confess at the beginning that my participation is somewhat selfish, because when I saw our panel and all our other participants, I thought I would probably gain more than I would offer back. But we'll see. I have just a few short comments to make. I'll go through my slides fairly quickly. Could I please have the first slide, Alex? Is the first slide up? Okay, great. So here is a very beautiful picture of the Arctic. And I think everyone on this call and our panel would agree that the Arctic is warming, the environment is changing, and nation states are rushing in. Could I have the next slide, please? This is a little bit fuzzy, but it's reminiscent of what we did many years ago across the Arctic, both in the Northwest and the Northeast. And my involvement in the Arctic, in my intense involvement, started off back in about 1998 when I commanded a fighter squadron, and our number one mission our mission was Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic, and we would routinely deploy up to our forward operating locations. Following that assignment, I was the Director of Air Operations for the Canadian NORAD region. And once again, our number one mission was Arctic sovereignty and NORAD. Following that, I returned to Cold Lake as the wing commander and the base commander. And as you can imagine, my number one mission and the squadrons under my command was was NORAD in Canada's High Arctic. Although we did have an expeditionary mission as well to join NATO and to support the UN and other coalitions. Following that assignment, I was assigned to the Vice Chief of Defense Staff and the Privy Council Office. And back in those days, about the 2006 to 2008 timeframe, the Arctic was a very popular policy discussion point. And I don't know if some of you will recall, but the government of the day and the Prime Minister routinely used the phrase, use it or lose it. And he was referring to Canada's Arctic and perhaps the economic zone that Canada was associated with Canadian territory. Could I have the next slide, please? I'm hoping the next slide is going to be a map of the Arctic that shows Russia on the right and Canada on the left. And again, this was the mission that we flew routinely, and we would deploy to Inuvik. And you can see on the right-hand side a red circle around Tixi Northeast. And Russian bomber assets would take off out of Tixi and head towards the Canadian archipelago. They would do a right-hand turn, point down towards Canada and the US, and then would typically recover in a base called Anadyr, or in fact even return to Tixi. We would take off out of Inuvik, and we would set up our cap over top of Borden Island, about 700 miles north of the Arctic coast. And you can imagine that it was an awesome trip to be up there. But what we realized, and could I have the next slide, please? And hopefully you can see a map here that has a lot of blue lines going back and forth between North America and other parts of Asia and even Europe, that we were not alone up there. It was very, very busy with the polar routes and the commercial airlines. And here we were up there trying to detect and intercept military bombers, all while dozens and scores of commercial air flights were passing through our little red box through our area of responsibility. Next slide, please. Hopefully you can see a slide here that talks about the Arctic Circle tourism information and what is going on up in the Arctic right now. So in addition to all the polar routes and the air traffic that routinely fly over top of the Arctic, we now have cruise ships. And the fighter pilot black humor that we used to use 20 years ago was that if we ever had to abandon our aircraft, eject out of our aircraft over the Arctic, we would most likely be picked up by a Russian submarine. Well, I think the pilots today might think about being picked up by a cruise ship. I think that would be a more pleasurable experience, and hopefully one that's, well, of course, we never wish for a pilot to have to leave his aircraft. But the cruise ships that are now coming up into the Arctic are indicative of how the Arctic is opening up. The activity, both from a tourist perspective and air travel perspective, and what's going on up there. Next slide, please. I'm hoping you'll see now Russia's newest nuclear-powered icebreaker. And with this capability, Russia has declared that the Arctic is theirs because they've proved it. And that was just recently in September 2020. The Arctica, which is the blue hulled vessel here, the same size as the 15-story building, about twice the length of 2 football fields. You can see what it's designed to do here from some of my bullets. It is the only nuclear-powered civilian vessel in the world today. However, Russia's plan is to have 13 of these vessels up in the Arctic to assert their presence and to assert their control and security across the Arctic. As you can see here, China is catching up and they're developing similar capabilities, similar vessels. And China's ambition is to open up the Arctic for their own use as well. You can see the Russian strategy down below. It is a priority for the Kremlin to dominate the Arctic, and for a number of different reasons, which I'll show here on the next slide. But you can see down in the right-hand corner, the original Antarctica in service from 1975 to 2008. And you can see its mission was to cut shipping lanes through the ice to allow civilian vessels to pass through the Russian part of the Arctic. And of course, I still remember the North Pole, the trip to the North Pole, and the flag that they put on the bottom of the Russian Ocean. Of course, the last couple of slides here are very telling because of the natural resources up in the Arctic. I think everyone who, all the Arctic nations and other nations in the world are very focused on those natural resources. Sorry? Okay. Next slide, please. Hopefully you'll see a picture mainly on the right-hand side of the screen showing Russia and Europe and Southeast and Asia. You can see why Russia wants to open up the shipping lanes going across the Arctic, going from Shanghai around the Kamchatka Peninsula through the Bering Strait and then into Murmansk and then around the corner to Rotterdam, as opposed to the blue line that shows the current shipping routes that are pretty much what is available to the commerce, the shipping that takes place. Next slide, please. Here you'll see a number of routes that have been plotted through the Arctic Ocean. And I look at the green one, the light green route, and I call that the 401 of the Arctic Ocean, which will soon be in full operation. And of course, the lighter blue route on the right is currently being opened by Russia. And then, of course, we've had the Northwest Passage taking place through the Canadian archipelago and down Baffin Island and into the Atlantic Ocean. But it is going to get very, very busy. And this is where China will also want to be active and present, and for the most part, in control of their own merchant marines and their commercial shipping going through the Arctic as well. So this is where everyone is rushing in. And of course, next slide, please. You'll see the other part of this equation, which is focused on resources. And you can see the Arctic nations, how they form the circumference of the Arctic area. You can see the symbols on the left-hand side. where there is mining, there is gas and oil operations, and then all the way across to Canada and even in the top part of Greenland. The big conversation piece, as we know, is the center part where all the various countries have laid claim to that international space. And then you have the Lomonosov feature that goes from the Russian territory all the way across to the North Pole, and then into Canada and Greenland territory as well. So that has caused some policy issues, some debates, some disputes, and the conversation continues. And it will become more active in the coming years as the Arctic opens up. Next slide, please. From a military perspective, and I will kind of go down to a very narrowly focused military or security perspective, Canada's foreign and defense policy goals and objectives, or military mission imperatives. You can see how they are racked and stacked at the bottom, mainly from an air power perspective, but generally speaking from Canada's mission imperatives. Number one is domestic security and air policing. That's generally speaking here in Canada. Then, of course, Canadian sovereignty and Canada's high Arctic. Canada's high Arctic is our largest area of responsibility, and it is massive. It is huge. Of course, we have homeland defense and continental defense through NORAD. And you can see the first 4 missions here are what we call non-discretionary. They're no fail, that we have to do these military missions at all costs. NATO, UN peace support, and then finally international coalitions. The reason why I rack and stack these missions here, next slide, please. The new security environment anywhere in the world, but most importantly in the Arctic, for the purpose of our discussion today, it will rely on a critical capability, and it is the Global Battlespace Digital Network. This is a network that currently exists, and Pierre Leblanc referred to a number of capability elements through satellite and radar sat and a number of other capability elements. But as far as this critical capability goes, we're involved in this right now, Boeing and the U.S. Navy. That it's all about constant development, continuous growth, obviously, rapid technology insertion. And that's where we can take a complete new capability element and insert it into whether it be a ship, ground equipment, or aircraft in a matter of minutes through this technology. Certainly to say data fusion and sensor fusion is important. On this network, every sensor that exists out there, whether it be satellite, airborne, shipborne, subsurface, land-based stations, radar sites, everything contributes to this global battlespace digital network. So if you're on this network, you receive a complete picture of the full battlespace. And so that's what gives you this total domain awareness. And once you have domain awareness, then you can move on to the rest of the security mission that you've been assigned to do. Another big part of this capability is what we call counter stealth. That stealth aircraft, static stealth aircraft, whether it be 5th gen or bombers, that type of stealth is moving into obsolescence. And now we have counter stealth and passive sensor technology that can be used to monitor the entire airspace and surface as well. The big elements of this capability, it's all about digital analytics and quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and then of course, semi-autonomous and autonomous systems. We could talk quite a bit about that, but I won't. I'll quickly sum up here. And then we have, as far as domain awareness leads to domain dominance. And there you can see the various elements of the mission that we are required to shoulder on behalf of not just Canada, but US and our other allies as well. Next slide, please. Hopefully you can see a bunch of airplanes up here on because I'm an air power guy. I'm also from Boeing, but you can see that this Global Battlespace Digital Network, every single one of these aircraft and the Northern Patrol vessel will be on this network. And the Block 3 Super Hornet has global SATCOM, and it has MIDS Link 16, and it has 17 times the computing power of 5th generation and other types of capabilities. And you can see in the bottom left, you can see the E7, and those are all drones. This is part of the what we call the Hornet swarm. Moving over to the top right, you can see the KC-46 and the P-8. Most of the nations, all our allies are moving towards the P-8. The center picture here shows the drones and the aircraft in the Hornet swarm, but most importantly, also part of this network capability are our land forces and our naval forces as well, whether it be Coast Guard or our military naval forces. Next slide. And I will hold it at that and pass it back to Dr. Talion. And thank you very much for the few minutes here that I've had to share a few capability elements with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. We have a number of questions already en route here. And one from the audience, quelles sont les relations entre le Canada et la Russie sur sa route de l'Arctique? What are the relations between Canada and Russia concerning these Arctic routes? I'll start off with Marisol. Marisol.
So, I mean, there is, some sensitivity around the status of these different routes. So just like Russia claims the Northern Sea Route to be internal waters and therefore argues for its ability to regulate them as it sees fit and to, charge fees and have other requirements, which the United States does not recognize. There is a similar difference of opinion with Canada over the Northwest Passage, but we have signed an agreement to basically agree to disagree, which has, I think, worked quite well over the years. And I think further evidence of that is the planned Healy mission this summer, which is with Global Affairs Canada, where they are going to be going hopefully through the Northwest Passage and up to Greenland. So I think that there are those differences in interpretation, and I know for Canada that is something that's very important to you. I think that the political will needs to be there in order for those negotiations to be fruitful. But I think that as it is, there's not like something pressing where we need to do this right now, because we're seeing China, doing some risky maneuvers at this moment. But things are changing, and I'll pass it on to someone else.
All right, thank you. I've combined two questions relating to drones here. What measures and countermeasures are being considered to deploy drones to the Arctic? Should they be armed? Charles, how would you like to swing at that?
Well, first of all, I think it's a good question, and I think we're all aware of what the prolific spread of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, and what we call RPAS, remotely piloted aerial vehicles, and drones. They have a role to play because, as I alluded to in my comments, our success in the Arctic on the security side, it's all about domain awareness. And drones and UAVs, and I've even heard airships have a role to play in providing that capability. So I would like to see drones move into the Arctic region as soon as possible to provide that domain awareness. I will say that I sat in on a conversation with General Van Herk, commander of NORAD, about 2.5, 3 months ago. And he stated as his number one requirement was domain awareness from his NORTHCOM NORAD perspective. But that's all our requirement, or that requirement is shared by all our Arctic nations, is we would like to know what's going on in the Arctic. And certainly the drones have a role to play. As far as arming drones, I could only see having those types of platforms armed under a conflict situation, if it ever came to that. I mean, I don't think there's a requirement to have armed drones up in the Arctic for carrying out domestic peacetime security surveillance and operations. But again, as soon as you cross over into some type of military conflict, then of course, the capabilities will change and capabilities will be brought in to protect each nation's sovereign rights, within a military conflict situation. But I'm not in favor of arming drones just for the sake of arming them, especially when it comes to looking after the security and protection of the Arctic.
Thank you. Next question. Should a change in the mandate of the Canadian Coast Guard be considered to provide an effective surveillance and enforcement capability in the high Arctic? Pierre, what do you think?
I believe so, and recommended something similar to that in the past. Right now, their mission does not include enforcement. Their mission is really for the support of the resupply, the annual resupply to the Arctic communities, which is essential. Obviously, search and rescue, hydrographic support, as well as the placing of navigational aids throughout the Arctic. That being said, right up to now, their presence has been the most colorful and visual presence of the Canadian government in the Arctic, with these red and white ships with the Canadian maple leaf. But they don't have an enforcement mission. I think that should be included in their mission. They should be provided the appropriate training so that if any activity onwards is taking place in the Arctic, that they have the capability to actually do something about it, as opposed to not being in a position to do so.
Thank you. As a matter of convention, the Arctic refers to the 5 Arctic coastal states: Canada, Denmark, with Greenland and the Faroe Islands, Norway, Russia, and the United States were the 8 full member states of the Arctic Council, the 5 plus Finland, Iceland, and Sweden. Will this Arctic Council be able to manage the divergent interests that exist between Arctic coastal states, Arctic non-coastal states, and non-Arctic states? Marisol, can you take this one?
Yeah, well, I think that's really the process that leads up to the joint declaration at the Arctic Council Ministerial, is that process of finding, it's a consensus-based organization, so it's finding those common interests and then being able to prioritize those for the 2 years of the country that's leading with the chairmanship. So yes, I think that there are a lot of places where there are overlapping interests, and where cooperation is not only a good thing, but it's really necessary because of how difficult it is to operate in the Arctic environment, the tyranny of distance, and then also just how much change the region is experiencing, and how pressing the need is for those changes to be better understood. And I think, I would just very much support what Duff had said about the need for domain awareness, and that's important for the civil security, human security, every level of security.
Thank you. Beijing has been described as a multi-domain polar state, developing nuclear-powered icebreakers, targeting investment in Arctic in terms of real estate and infrastructure. It has also reinforced its research presence, all of which reflects a classic grand strategic objective of resource access, while concomitantly developing strategic power and influence in the region. Moreover, the Arctic has been included in the Belt and Road Initiative. How can the Arctic coastal states cooperate effectively against these sublime yet increasingly aggressive Chinese initiatives in this region? Pierre, can you handle that one?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. As I mentioned in my presentation, my concern is what the long-term plan of China is. Typically, the Chinese have had very long-term plans, as opposed to, let's say, the Western world that has shorter plans, dealing with issues, making a quick dollar, and then moving on. So I'm concerned with the interest that China has in the Arctic. 2 areas more specifically would be going after natural resources in the Arctic. There is a moratorium right now for fishing in the central part of the Arctic, but it could be that once that moratorium expires, if it's not renewed, the Chinese fishing vessels, given the disappearing of the ice, could go up to the Arctic and fish that area, even though we don't have the science to really support the level of fishing that they would be involved in. There's also the extension of continental shelves. Will China forcibly go into those areas in the future to extract natural resources, despite the fact that those areas and resources would belong to one of the Arctic states? When we look at the Chinese involvement in the South China Sea, where some of the Coast Guard vessels, for example, have been supporting illegal fishing by the Chinese fishing fleet, or black fishing vessels of China fishing deliberately in many areas of the world where they should not be doing so. Will they do that in the Canadian Arctic? We need to know for sure what's going on in the Arctic and be in a position to deal with the issue should it come forward.
Thank you. Russia has reportedly instigated an access denial strategy, which increases the ability of Moscow to threaten distant targets with the deployment of traditional power projection. The Arctic may still be relatively free of Russian maritime or air forces, but has the potential to become a base from which Moscow can threaten targets of strategic value in the Arctic and as far away as North America and Europe. For many observers, Russia's military buildup cannot be isolated in the larger picture of strategic competition with NATO and the allies. How should the Arctic coastal states, NATO, NORAD, deal with this? Charles, do you want to take that one?
Yes, thank you very much. I've been involved with security and defense in North America and with Russia for many decades. I think Russia has the ability to threaten North America without moving, strategic assets into the Arctic. They have a very well-developed military capability to reach out, as we call it, reach globally. And so I think the question is, if we were to observe Russia moving military forces into the Arctic region outside of their own, I mean, if they're maneuvering forces within their own sovereign territory, that's one thing. But to now start pushing out beyond their sovereign territory with capabilities that are specifically intended to threaten North American locations, targets, then that would be I think a significant, a major diplomatic situation between Russia and NORAD and Canada and the U.S. But again, Russia has the ability to strike targets all over the world, and so I think the question is, how would we respond if they started moving into the Arctic? I could see them bringing military forces into the Arctic for their own national security reasons. If they have shipping lanes up there, if they have other commercial interests in the Arctic, whether it be mining and oil and gas, that if they thought those assets might be threatened, they might want to put their own security forces in place. And that could be military forces as well, as I showed in one of my slides. But I think your point about bringing those strategic assets into the Arctic outside their own sovereign locations would be a significant international situation that would have to be addressed in a very serious manner.
Thank you. Where do Arctic operations and heavy icebreakers fit in an Arctic strategy? Well, since Marisol's been on board ship quite often, I'd like to ask Marisol her opinion on this. Marisol.
All right, thanks, Paul. So I don't do a ton on Antarctica. I really do focus on the Arctic. However, I mean, I think the main point is that we need to have that ability to be present, and part of power projection is that presence. And so it's really I'm very glad that we have the first 2 polar security cutters funded, and we have long lead materials funded for the third. We need those to be coming online. As you likely know, Healy had a fire in the engine last year. Thankfully, I was on Healy the year before, so I got to avoid COVID and the fire. So I feel very blessed. But yeah, it's really about presence and projecting that power and influence, and being able, again, in terms of domain awareness, kind of understanding what's going on is really important. And then if I could just quickly add two quick things. One, in terms of China, I really think that something that would help to decrease, especially potential impacts around Chinese foreign direct investment in the Arctic, is to increase transparency. And so we've seen a lot of movement in the US national security community towards wanting beneficial ownership, so that you can see who is actually behind some of these companies that are showing interest in investment. And then additionally, in terms of research, because we know that China has dual use research, there may be certain types of research that are more appropriate for involving China than others. And I think that is actually a conversation that's kind of worth digging into more, because we do need to be working with China, and they do have observer status in the Arctic Council, so they are a player. But I think it's about, okay, how can we have that be appropriate engagement, knowing that they are challenging the current in the multipolar worlds, kind of the power dynamics. And then just in terms of Russia and NATO, I really do think that in terms of building that credible deterrence, NATO needs to have the operational capability to respond in the incident that Article 5 is triggered. And so I think that at the very least, having an Arctic working group within NATO that would help to coordinate NATO's response, because of the different branches, the Maritime Command and then the Joint Command in Norfolk, kind of understanding what that would look like. And that is a part of that credible deterrence.
Thank you very much for that. For some observers, the traditional political cooperation in the Arctic is under increasing threat. Managing Russia's initiatives, as well as China, must be a priority. Should NATO start prudently deploying military resources in parts of the Arctic to manage our multilateral security concerns within the region? How can Canada lead this initiative? Pierre, would you like to handle this one?
Yeah, that might be a bit of a difficult one for Canada, because in the past, Canada has objected to NATO becoming involved in the Canadian Arctic. That being said, NATO sort of saw the development of the Arctic threat and the developments, obviously, given global warming a number of years ago, and it started to spend a lot more analysis on what is taking place. They've now increased the number of exercises taking place on the maritime side, for example, going up past the Arctic Circle to be able to maintain a capability. So I think it's prudent for NATO to be better aware of what's going on in the Arctic and make the appropriate preparation to be able to deploy forces there should that be required.
Thank you. The next question is rather complex and interrelated. In the wake of the Cold War, we witnessed a competing continental shelf claims, ongoing border disputes, steadily increasing maritime traffic, and renewed military deployments and infrastructure in the Arctic. Environmental issues, in particular, the accelerated Arctic warming, focused international attention and brought a new sense of urgency to sovereignty issues, territorial integrity, and security issues, joining an array of environmental and economic challenges that exist within the Arctic. A number of Arctic states have signed declarations pledging to abide on existing international law to address differences, most notably the law of the sea. In his 1987 speech, President Mikhail Gorbachev envisaged the Arctic as a zone of peace. What means can be put in place to facilitate this sentiment? Pierre, would you like to handle that one?
I would say initially through transparency of operations that are taking place in the Arctic. Russia has made a number of people very uneasy with the increase of their military capabilities. What is the threat to Russia? Which country would actually be able to exercise a military operation against the northern part of Russia? In terms of capability, really nobody has that kind of capability right now. So Russia is obviously developing its security for its own purposes, and that's legitimate. How much of that is taking place? Why is it taking place? If all the countries that are involved in security aspects of the Arctic were more transparent in their activities through various forum discussions, meetings of Coast Guards, Chief of Defense Staffs, and so on, there would be a better sense of cooperation in the Arctic, and certainly avoiding any miscalculation on the security side that would have some dire consequences. It would be ideal if the Arctic was a zone of peace without nuclear weapons. But given the military assets of Russia, that's probably not going to take place. Murmansk is just too important for their own security, for that base to not be where it is, and nuclear weapons not being there. So again, transparency, I think, would be the best way forward in terms of minimizing risk that's taking place in the Arctic.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing?
Please,
Okay.
Marisol.
Thank you. I can't resist. So when it comes to like the overlapping claims, this is where, like what I had mentioned in my remarks about there's not a legal vacuum in the Arctic. There are international legal mechanisms for evaluating those claims, through the Commission on the Limits of Continental Shelf. And even they will evaluate it and say whether the evidence submitted supports that claim. They don't adjudicate any type of disputes. That has to be done separately. But I would say that Russia really isn't a revisionist power in the Arctic because it's such a huge Arctic state that has so much territory that the international law works in their favor in terms of their claims. So I mean, that's where I would have a little bit of faith in the international system. One thing to keep an eye on, obviously, will be as there is increase in charting of the oceans and hydrographic data, bathymetry, and kind of looking at what's out there. Maybe in the future, if there was an unfavorable ruling towards Russia, they might be like, well, we don't care, we're going to do what we want. But that's honestly years out. Maybe it's something to keep in the back of our minds. But I think that the international legal process is really solid and quite stabilizing.
And
Thank
Paul,
you.
can I just say a quick word on this as well?
Please.
Yes, so very quickly, I agree with both Pierre and Marisol on this. It really is about a rule-based order. We have laws, we have international laws that guide and govern how we will conduct ourselves, but how we will react with our friends and allies. And I consider everybody to be friends and allies up until they're not. But I also, there's a couple of points here that Pierre and Marisol touched on. And, although I've been involved on the military side, on the air power side up in the Arctic, I see the zone primarily as a commercial business zone. And that I would like to see countries like China invited to participate in the establishment of the commercial shipping routes and maintaining them, whether it be with their own icebreakers. And if we were to ever have a disaster up in the Arctic, I think all stakeholders should be called to assist. Primarily, Russia and the U.S. and Canada and Norway, but we would invite other stakeholders in the Arctic to also, lend a hand, as we say. And most importantly, that I think every country, not just the Arctic countries, but every country should be vested in the environmental side of the Arctic, looking after it. I mean, it's not just the coastal countries, it's every country in the world has an interest to make sure that the Arctic region stays clean and pristine. And, Lord help us all that it doesn't turn into some type of military ground that in the future. It's commercial, it's business, and we should invite interested countries and states to come in and be a part of this and to contribute to making the Arctic a success under a rule-based order that we tend to like to champion.
Next one would be, how would having a larger military presence in Resolute Bay help out Canadian national defense? I'll leave that one to Pierre.
Yes, thank you for that one. Resolute Bay, as I mentioned, is sitting right on the Northwest Passage. So in terms of controlling maritime traffic, it's in an ideal position. It's also a choke point for submersible if they wanted to transit from one end to the other of the Northwest Passage. So surveillance of subsurface activity could very easily be done. The distance between the landmass at the Resolute area is actually somewhere around only 30 kilometers. So it's very easy to control that space. In terms of search and rescue, Resolute Bay would be in a position to act quickly, either going west, east, or even north. Although north, there's very little activity taking place other than those polar flights. Also, from an environmental response position, the Coast Guard has a number of supply depots that have material used in case of a spill. Resolute Bay could be one of the major depots for equipment required to deal with a fuel spill. We had a cruise ship run aground about 2 years ago, the Académique OEF, and there was a bit of a fuel spill on that site. So you need to be able to act quickly right across the Canadian Arctic, and Resolute Bay is well positioned to do that. It's also central. There's a sort of a central, let's call it a gap in between Inuvik, Iqaluit, and Thule in terms of air operations. And although I'm an Army background, if I was a fighter pilot, I would love to have a paved runway in Resolute Bay to be able to act more quickly, especially now that the Canadian Armed Forces have extended the identification zone all the way to the northern tip of Ellesmere Island. To be able to reach that position quickly and effectively and be able to support fighter operations, having a paved runway with all the appropriate approach instrumentation and so on would be ideal. For all the maritime traffic that's going through the Northwest Passage with very legitimate reasons, Resolute Bay could be a refuge in case of a storm, or if there was any damage to any ships, they could be repaired right in Resolute Bay. Right now, there's a huge area. As you may have seen from one of my slides, it's the size of Europe. It's to have no ports anywhere in Europe and having to transit that kind of space without any support, whether it's commercial or military, it is in my book a lacune that we have in the Arctic. So I would certainly recommend the development and the investment of facilities in Resolute Bay. There is already a significant amount of infrastructure by the various departments. and it could be a multi-departmental operation during the shipping season with low occupancy during the winter time, if you wish.
Thank you. Here's a question which I will ask to both Charles and Marisol. With Russia capability of plowing through 2.5 to 3 meters of ice with nuclear icebreakers all the way to the North Pole for a very expensive cruise, what is stopping Russia from going through the rest of the ice into the American or Canadian Arctic? Marisol, would you like to crack on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the capability is there, but it's kind of like, why? Like, they'd be there, and then there'd probably be like some subsistence fishermen out there who kind of look at them sideways, and like, I don't, I think the question is like, you know, what would cause them to do something like that? What would they hope to gain out of it? And I think that, you know, kind of understanding, you know, what is likely behavior from Russia is important. I guess that's my response.
Okay, thank you. And Charles?
Yeah, that's Marisol, I like your response. I would say that you have to ask what the motivation would be, the motive. And if it's just simply to assert their presence, then that would require, you know, using diplomatic language, a démarche, you know, back to the Russian state. And if it's for other reasons, like if they're doing environmental studies, if they're even doing the mapping and you know, cruising around the Arctic, and they're cutting through all the ice up there, when they come into another country's economic zone or their sovereign territory, territorial waters, then again, there are rules and regulations and orders in place to allow that type of activity. But again, I go back to the original point, is that was it simply done to assert a presence, you know, a Russian presence, and then that would require a response from the appropriate state where they've entered into. But simply cruising around international waters up in the Arctic, I think it would be something that we would monitor. We would let them know that we know they're there. And we're keeping a very close eye on them. Again, domain awareness. And domain awareness is also the ability to tell other state actors when we know they're doing something, so that they're not getting away with anything, you know, without us knowing. But I would just add those comments to Marisol's great answer.
Thank you. Well, Ms. Maddox, Colonel Leblanc, General Sullivan, on behalf of the Policy Insights Forum, I would like to thank you for your incisive commentary and responses. This has been a very enlightening session, drawing from our commentaries, and underlines the complexity of Northern Arctic issues and multilateralism in addressing our common threats from Russia, China, and the environmental considerations, amongst others. I have no doubt that this session's topic will inevitably be a focus for Canada and our allies as we attempt to orchestrate an effective national security strategy for the Arctic in conjunction with the United States and our other Arctic and non-Arctic partners. Thank you again for your time, and we look forward to having you on future programs. I will now pass you to Aliénor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taillon. On behalf of the Policy Insights Forum and Samuel Associates, I would like to thank our special guest speakers, Ms. Maddox, General Sullivan, and Colonel Leblanc, for an engaging and informative session about this important multilateral national security topic of the Arctic. Au nom du Policy Insights Forum et de Samuel Associates, j'aimerais remercier nos invités spéciaux, Madame Maddox, le général Sullivan et le colonel Leblanc, pour une session instructive et stimulante sur cet important sujet multilatéral et de sécurité nationale qu'est l'Arctique. Je tiens également à remercier le Dr Taillon pour sa présentation remarquable en tant que modérateur. I would also like to thank Dr. Taillon for an outstanding presentation as moderator. To our audience in Canada, the United States, Europe, and all over the world, thank you for participating in our Strategic Perspective series. For more information about our upcoming events, please visit us at www.policyinsights.ca. À notre public du Canada, des États-Unis, de l'Europe et du monde entier, merci d'avoir participé à notre série de perspectives stratégiques. Pour plus d'informations sur nos prochains événements, veuillez nous rendre visite au www.policyinsights.ca. Nous espérons vous revoir bientôt. Merci. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.